Today, I want to talk about one of the most famous pens in our fountain pen hobby, and that is the Montblanc Meisterstuck 146. So nowadays, I'm not sure why, Montblanc seems to be getting away from calling this the 146. They call it, this is the Montblanc Meisterstruck. LeGrand 146. So first of all, I've had this pen for almost 10 years now, and despite what I may or may not say in this video, this particular pen does mean a lot to me because it was a gift from my in-laws when I first met them. So this particular pen I do feel is pretty special. That said, I'm going to explain in this video why, while I really think this is one of the most flawless pens in the entire fountain pen industry, I have a hard time feeling that it is a special pen in terms of something to use, to look at, to feel. But first, let's talk about Montblanc's line of plastic pens. So they're precious resin, which is really just proprietary resin. It's what they call their plastic pens. So in their Meisterstuck line, they have the 145, which is a pen narrower than this with a smaller nib. I'm not a huge fan of that pen. I don't own one. I've used one several times before, haven't found the nib particularly special or pleasant. There's the 146 line, which is this, often referred to as the LeGrand. There's the 147, which is the cartridge version. And that has a very interesting mechanism in the back where it holds a couple of Montblanc cartridges, kind of interesting. And then of course there's the 149, which is the big one. It's the diplomat, so to speak, the large Montblanc pen. These, in the regular production line, these have a 14 karat nib, and the 149 is an 18 karat. Now, there are exceptions to that, of course. There are special editions, there are ones that are metal body, there's all this stuff, and you get different nib materials within the lineups. But overall, that's the Montblanc precious resin, I can't speak today, precious resin Meisterstuck lineup. So this is the 146. This pen is a great pen. It's just, for me, about the perfect size. You can laugh at Montblanc for calling it precious resin. It's basically just a plastic, but the finishing on it is very, very nice. There are no edges anywhere. There are no injection molding lines anywhere. It's very, very nicely finished. The plating on this pen is really, really nicely done. Very pretty, very robust. Like I said, I've had this pen almost 10 years, and it's been inked most of the time. And this pen, aside from some fingerprints that you see and some dust maybe, this pen looks brand new. So very, very high quality. The other thing that is great about this pen is the balance. This is a piston filler pen, so you unscrew the back and it has a piston mechanism in there, so something like a Twisby Eco, but much more expensive. But somehow the balance is really nice. It doesn't feel at all back heavy. It feels very comfortable in the hand, and it strikes a very nice balance between a light pen and something that's too light. So a lot of people will say pens like the Pilot Explorer are too light. I personally find pens like the Pilot Falcon, the plastic version, to be too light. This one is light and comfortable, but it doesn't give you the impression that it's too light or in any way feels cheap or inexpensive. So the balance and the weight, very, very nicely judged. But to me, by far, the best part of this pen is the nib. So not only is this 14 karat two-tone nib really quite pretty to look at, this nib is such a pleasant writer, such a pleasant pen to use. So this is Waterman Blue. And I have to apologize, I'm kind of writing next to this tripod here, so it's a little bit of an awkward angle, but you can see just really nice, really smooth, just the right amount of feedback. This is a fine nib, and it is definitely a Western fine. This is about the line width of my Pilot Custom 74, which is a medium. About the same width as a Platinum 3776 medium. So this is definitely a Western fine, so on the thicker end of fine. But there's just nothing I can say about this pen in terms of the size, the weight, the feel, the nib. Really hard for me to say anything negative about it. Now, one pen I want to use as a quick reference is the Pilot 823. Now, as many of you have know about me, if you've watched any of my other videos, I am a big Pilot fan. I don't think that's any exaggeration. Pilot is my favorite pen brand, and in my mind, they make some of the best quality pens out there. Definitely the best value in terms of what you get for something like the price of an 823, something like a 743. If you compare that across what you find across the industry, in my opinion, they make the best bang for buck. They also make some of the most consistent pens in terms of quality. So I would love to say that a pen like the 823 is a good match to the Montblanc 146, and they definitely are. It definitely is in terms of size. You can see something like a Pilot 823 or the cartridge version, the 743. It is definitely about the same size. So if you're looking for something that's comfortable in the hand, if you like the weight or the size of the 146, then yes, the Pilot 823 is a good match for that. But even as a huge fan of Pilot, I have to admit that the 146 feels a notch above the 823 in terms of finish and in terms of the performance of the nib. So in terms of finish, there's just something about the way the material feels. The 823, and it might be because they're using a translucent resin here, it feels a bit plasticier. It just feels a bit cheaper. The threads, and that's a subjective measure. What is not subjective is that the threads are definitely smoother on the Montblanc. So I don't know if you can hear the difference, but if I close the pen, I'm not sure if you can hear the plastic between the two. The Montblanc is definitely smoother than the Pilot. And the nib. This Pilot 14 karat nib, it's about the same size as that of the Montblanc. This one's actually a little bit bigger. But in aesthetics, the Montblanc's two-tone nib is, in my opinion, nicer than the Pilot. And the Pilot, even though this is one of my all-time favorite nibs, and I would call the nib on the 823 one of the all-time greats, the 146 just has a little something else to it. It's a little bit smoother, it's slightly softer, and in terms of writing, it's just a more pleasant nib to use. This is just it's an ideal writer. So at this point, you may be thinking, wow, this pen's really great. It must be really a special pen. And to me, this is where I have a hard time with the 146. This pen, it feels like the ideal daily writer. It doesn't look, I mean, aside from the white star, which, you know, has its status appeal, I guess. Aside from that, it's a fairly boring pen to look at. The shape is just the typical cigar shaped pen, very, very standard. The size is, like I just showed you, the same as a 823. It's not really special in size. The nib options, you can certainly get interesting nibs like an oblique nib or double broad or something like that, but this one is just a standard fine. It's just a great writing pen, and that's where it falls apart a bit for me, because I looked at Montblanc's website just before recording this video, and the sticker price for this pen is over $700 in the US. And yes, it is a little bit nicer than pens like the Pilot 823, but $700, I want the pen to feel special. And while this pen is flawless in terms of how it writes, flawless in terms of the build quality, the materials, it doesn't feel like a special pen to me when I use it. And I have a really hard time justifying the price of something like this, given the experience that it gives back. Because $700, you know, I'm not really just looking for something that performs well as a writer at that point. And that's not to say, you know, that's how I feel about Montblanc pens in general. I have a couple Montblanc 149s that have been grail pens for me that absolutely do feel special, and I hopefully will get around to making a video about them and explaining why. There are other versions of the 146. I was gifted a Aviator, the Petite Prince Aviator version a couple years ago, the brown one with some metal highlights, and that one does definitely feel special. It feels like it's a very unique color, very unique look. It reminds me of one of my favorite books. That does feel special. But the standard 146 with this fine nib is a hard sell to me for $700. But anyway, I hope that was a useful overview of one of the pens, the venerable pens in our fountain pen industry, one of the best writing pens that I own, one of the most comfortable pens in my collection, but also one that doesn't strike me as a good value. Anyway, I hope that was fun. Apologies for the random angle in this video. I'm making this video on the road, so it's a bit of a weird setup here, but I appreciate you watching, and hope you have a good day.